War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is power. Those are the pillars of society as described in George Orwell's dystopian novel 1984. But that reality does not just exist in the novel. The Russian politician Vladimir Kara-Murza has been fighting against that reality, which he says does exist under the regime of Vladimir Putin today. Kara-Murza began speaking out against the Russian government at the age of 16. He entered Russian politics in the late 1990s as Vladimir Putin was rising in the ranks of the Kremlin. Kara-Murza's vocal and longtime opposition to Putin's regime put his life in danger countless times. In 2015 and 2017, Kara-Murza was poisoned, although no evidence could be linked directly back to the Kremlin. Kara-Murza's opposition to Putin reached a new level of importance 904 days ago when Russia began its war on Ukraine. Kara-Murza publicly condemned Putin for his invasion of Ukraine, saying Putin condemns, quote, a regime of murderers. Kara-Murza refused to be silent, leading family and friends to fear for his safety and his imprisonment if he went back to Russia. One of those friends was Bill Browder, a businessman with deep and personal knowledge of Vladimir Putin's wrath. In 2007, Browder helped expose a massive corruption by Russian government officials with his friend and attorney, Sergei Magnitsky. He's a whistleblower whose torture and death inside a Russian prison sparked global outcry and worldwide legislation against Putin's human rights abuses. Browder knew what horrors could await Vladimir Kara-Murza if he was put in a Russian prison. In April of 2022, Bill had dinner with Vladimir and his wife in London. He pleaded for Vladimir not to return to Moscow. Quote, Vladimir, there's no way you can go back to Moscow. They've tried to kill you twice. They'll try again. At best, they'll arrest you. And if they do, we have no leverage to get you out. Putin has gone so far off the rails that he doesn't care what anyone thinks, end quote. A weary expression passed over Vladimir's face. I'm sure every friend had said the same thing after learning about his plans to go back to Russia. Bill, he said, I'm a Russian politician. All Russians should stand up to Putin. But how can I ask others to do that if I'm too afraid to return to my own country? I must be there. I spoke with Vladimir Kara-Murza on April 10th, 2022, just days after Bill's efforts to stop him from returning to Moscow. Here's a little bit of our fateful conversation. Are you worried about speaking out against the Russian government and against this war and invasion from Russia?
We all know the price. We all know the cost. But we also know that there are millions of people in Russia who categorically oppose Putin regime and everything it's doing, both in terms of domestic repression and in terms of external aggression.
The very next day, Vladimir Kara-Murza was arrested outside his house in Russia, convicted ultimately of treason and sentenced to 25 years in a Siberian prison for his opposition to the war. Given only 1.5 hours a day to write in his cell, Kara-Murza risked further retaliation by writing passionate columns that were published in the Washington Post. And those columns earned Kara-Murza a Pulitzer Prize while he was still incarcerated. Even when petitioning for his freedom before Russia's Supreme Court, Kara-Murza would not relent. He wrote, quote, for a third year now, my country, or more precisely, an aging, irremovable, illegitimate dictator who has arrogated to himself the right to speak and act on behalf of my country, has been waging a brutal, unjust, invasive war against a neighboring independent state. In the course of this aggression, the invader has committed genuine war crimes, end quote. Kara-Murza remained imprisoned in Russia until 2 weeks ago, when he became one of the 24 prisoners released in the historic prisoner exchange arranged by the Biden White House. Kara-Murza and his family met with President Biden at the White House last night. Joining us now, free from his cell in a Siberian prison, is the Russian opposition leader and Pulitzer Prize winner Vladimir Kara-Murza. Also with us is his friend and mine, the advocate Bill Browder, CEO of Hermitage Capital Management and head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Volodya, I want to just reach through the camera and give you a hug, first of all. I truly, and Bill knows this, and your wife knows this, I didn't think we would have this conversation ever. So welcome back.
Neither did I, Ali. I was, and up until 3 weeks ago, I was certain that I was going to die in a Siberian prison, and everything still feels like a miracle. You know, frankly, felt as if I've been watching some sort of a movie. It's a very good one, but it still feels very surreal. And I just want to thank you for having me back on the show. It's really good to be back on your program. That interview that you just aired, the clip you just aired from, was my last television interview before my arrest. So it has special meaning to be back here on MSNBC. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who, over these past 2.5 years, continued their efforts, continued to speak out, continued to campaign, continued to remind people of the plight of those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of political prisoners and prisoners of conscience who are languishing in Putin's modern-day gulag for the only quote-unquote crime of opposing Putin's dictatorship and for opposing his criminal aggressive war against Ukraine. And let's not forget that while 16 of us have been snatched from that hell, there are so many others who are still there. And this historic exchange that happened 2 weeks ago showed, I think, very clearly that at the end of the day, public opinion in the free world is stronger than any dictator and any dictator's propaganda machine. And I was very grateful to have the opportunity yesterday to personally thank the President of the United States and the role he played in that exchange, in saving the lives of 16 people, of 16 human beings, of 16 human souls. To me, the difference between a democracy and a dictatorship is that there can be no higher value for a democracy than human life. And 16 human lives were saved in that exchange on the 1st of August at Ankara Airport. And I think despite the stereotypes, despite the usual drumbeat of the cynics and the skeptics, that decision, that exchange showed that there is thankfully still room for principle and values in political decision-making.
If there was a drumbeat, some of the key drummers were your wife, who appeared on my show 1 year after your arrest to talk about what was going on, and of course, our friend Bill. I know you two got a chance to reunite the other night. Bill tweeted out that you had a huge feast to put some calories into you because you've lost a lot of weight in prison. But Bill, you saw Volodya the other day, and we talked about this a lot, and you kept that pressure up. And I think that's important. It's instructive about what happens next and what's going to happen. And when you and I talked tonight that Vladimir was released, you said he's going to come back and we're going to continue the fight.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And as Vladimir just said, there's 1,000+ other people in Putin's gulag, and a lot of people who are potentially going to die if we don't get them out. And on top of that, of course, is Putin's murderous war against Ukraine. And we have to do everything possible to help the Ukrainians fight back against Putin. And so we're taking a moment right now to celebrate this absolute miracle of Vladimir being alive and free. And we're going to enjoy this moment, but we have a lot more work to do. And when Vladimir and I sat down last Sunday for dinner, that's what we talked about, is what we're going to do next and how we're going to do it next, because Putin's not going away. And until we get rid of Putin, there's going to be a lot of suffering and a lot of terrible stuff happening in the world.
Vladimir, if someone didn't know you'd been in jail for the last 2.5 years in prison, they might not know. You look a little slimmer than you did back then, and I know you've got some health issues that didn't make doing hard time good for you. But tell me what that was like. You were in isolation the entire time.
Yes, I spent, out of the 2.5 years in prison, I spent almost 11 months straight in solitary confinement, where essentially you just sit in a small cell, in a small cupboard, 2 by 3 meters, so about 7 by 10 feet. Nothing in the cell. You don't have anything on you. There's just one small window near the ceiling. Your bunk gets attached to the wall at 5 o'clock in the morning and until 9 p.m. when it's light out. You don't have anyone to speak to. You don't have anything to do. You have nowhere to go. All you can do is effectively just, walk around the cell as much as you can in that confined space and stare at a wall. You're only given pen and paper to write for 90 minutes a day. For another 90 minutes, you're taken out for a so-called walk, which is essentially just walking around in a small internal roof-covered prison courtyard, not much larger than than a cell. And on top of, constantly being in this confined space, on top of complete isolation from any human contact. And by the way, there's a reason why, according to international law, according to the United Nations minimal standard rules on the treatment of prisoners, solitary confinement that is more than 15 days long is officially considered to be a form of torture, degrading, or inhumane treatment, because as Aristotle said, human beings are social animals. We need interaction. We need human contact just as much as we need food to eat or water to drink or oxygen to breathe. And when you're completely deprived of that, well, frankly, that's extremely difficult mentally and psychologically. So it's a psychological form of torture. And on top of all of that, I was forbidden from calling my family in the 2.5 years I've been to prison. I only once was able to telephone my wife, and twice my 3 children. I was forbidden from going to church. And, it was funny to me. Well, funny perhaps is the wrong word in this situation, but amusing at least that, so many people around the world take this sort of Kremlin propaganda line that somehow Vladimir Putin is a defender of traditional family values, traditional Christian values. That's how he likes to portray himself. And, whenever anybody in the West repeats that propaganda line, I hope they remember the fact that, political opponents of Putin, political prisoners of Putin who are confined to the prisons and penal camps are not allowed to call their wives or their children, are not allowed to go to church. Alexei Navalny was in exactly the same situation as I was. So much for traditional family values. Hypocrisy is a real cornerstone of the Putin regime in everything they do.